depending on where you're joining from. If you've been alerted, as I have, this meeting is being recorded. So just take that into consideration. Now, I wonder, great, someone has put in the chat, so I'm assuming you can hear me. Maybe people can just give a welcome in the chat, maybe your name and your institution or your sort of where you're at in your research career. That would be great to hear from you. There's going to be lots of us here today, so we won't be able to go through everyone, but it would be great to get a bit of a flavour for who's with us. So today we've got the session is how to be an effective peer reviewer, and it's part of our Excellence in Peer Review session. And this session's being run jointly between the Operational Research Society and Taylor & Francis, the publishing house. It's actually the first in a sort of a joint series, so maybe if there's appetite, we'll run these again on different topics. And yeah, it's really great that you've joined us and registered for this event. So we've got 2 hours, and the session's split into 2 sections. The first part is on that kind of core topic of how to be an effective reviewer, and we've got Victoria Babbitt with us from Taylor & Francis, who's our director for research outreach and development, and we'll do introductions in a minute. But the webinar will kind of cover all the essentials of peer review, really the nuts and bolts of it, and then some sort of deeper topics for discussion, including the different types of peer review, the responsibilities of peer reviewer, how the types of criteria you might use to assess an article, and then other considerations and trends around research ethics, and what to do in those kind of difficult situations where you're not quite sure what to do in that role. Then the second part, so on the turn of the hour, we'll kind of move into an editor panel session, and we've got 4 editors joining us today from the ORS Society journals, and we'll have a good fun discussion with them, asking different topics on peer review with different perspectives there, both from the author's position, that of the reviewer, and also the editor's perspective as well. And there'll be some time for open Q&A in both sections, and we'll probably put that at the back end of those sessions. So that's kind of how the session will run. Housekeeping, obviously keep yourselves on mute is if you can, and then if as we get to questions, I'll sort of call upon people and you can unmute and ask your question either to Victoria at the end of her session or to the panelists. And we've got a few different functions. We're using the chat for kind of informal welcomes. We've also got the raise hands function when we get to questions. But actually, we also have the Q&A as well. So if you're on Zoom, whether you're on the sort of browser app or on the web browser, you'll see Q&A, and we'll use that to take questions. So without further ado, I'll kind of hand over to Victoria. But first, I would like to welcome Chiara Carparelli to the stage to give a sort of welcome and an introduction to the Operational Research Society. So Chiara, over to you, and then we'll begin the session.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me just get a slide up quickly. Can everyone see that okay?
It's just, yeah, we can see that.
So yeah, I'm just here to say a quick hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So as Richard said, my name is Chiara, and I'm the education manager at the ORS Society. Carol, who is our head of professional services, who some of you might know, couldn't be here today, so I'm just stepping in to say hi and to introduce myself and the ORS Society. So we're thrilled to be co-hosting this event with Taylor & Francis. And as some of you might be aware, we do publish 7 academic journals that you can see on the screen, and we've got a QR code up if you want to find out more about our journals. I'm sure you'll hear more during the webinar. I also just wanted to take a moment to highlight the vibrant community that we have at the OR Society. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a membership organization for operational research professionals. And as a member, you can access not only our publications, but also our awards, our events, our networking opportunities, and our accreditation options. And because I saw a few of you on the chat, for those of you who are students, we do have a fully subsidized student membership as well. So there's a QR code on the screen if you want to check out more about our membership. And if you did get involved in our journals, for instance, as a reviewer, I'm sure you'll come across my wonderful colleague, Sophie, who is our research and publications coordinator and is here today. So yeah, we'd love for you to keep in touch and consider membership with us. If you have any questions, you can ping them in the chat or just email us directly. And thank you again for being here. And I'll hand back over to Richard to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Kiara. And I completely overlooked the fact that I should probably introduce myself. You're wondering who this strange man is, but my name is Richard Goodman. I work for Taylor & Francis as a journal portfolio manager, covering topics from OR management science through to industrial engineering operations management. And I work with the OR Society as well as a number of journals at Taylor & Francis. So that's how I slot into things. So if you're interested in publication, getting involved as a reviewer, if you have feedback, suggestions, then you can get in contact with me. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I'll be pleased to interact with you there. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Victoria to introduce herself, and at your convenience, Victoria, you can begin your session.
Great, thanks, Richard. And hello, everyone. Welcome today. As Richard said, my name is Victoria Babbitt, and I am the Director of Research and Development and Outreach at Taylor & Francis, and I'm based in Stockholm, Sweden. So let me just load my slides up here.
Yeah,
can you see those okay?
Coming through, Victoria. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Great. All right. So we have quite a bit of material to cover today, so I think we should just get started. So during our webinar, we will be going through the steps that are involved in the peer review process from the perspective of a reviewer. So this will be things to think about before you even receive an invitation through to actually completing a peer review report. But let's start off with defining peer review. And here we have a couple of really straightforward definitions of peer review. One is from an organization called Sense About Science, which is an independent charity that champions the public interest in sound science and ensures evidence is recognized in public life and in policymaking. So here they say peer review is the evaluation of scientific research findings for validity, significance, and originality by qualified experts who research and submit work for publication in the same field, so peers. And then the second one comes from the US National Academy of Science. And here they say a peer review is a documented critical review performed by peers who are independent of the work being reviewed. So the two things that I pull out of these is that we're looking for qualified experts, and those experts need to be independent of the work. Now, hopefully, because you're at this webinar, you're already convinced that peer review is an important process. Detailed assessment of articles is essential to ensure that what is published is of sufficient quality and can be trusted. And although it can sometimes feel very challenging from an author's perspective, at its best, peer review is more like a conversation between reviewers, editors, and authors, where the research can be discussed, improved upon, and effectively communicated to a wider research community. And as the quote on this slide from Andrew Preston highlights, it is a form of collaboration between experts. And I think that's really easy to forget for all of us, or all of you that are going through the peer review process, that it really is about collaboration. So starting at the very beginning, let's first remind ourselves of what is involved in the peer review process. So here's a summary of the main elements of a peer review process. And different journals will have slightly different approaches, but most of the key aspects will be the same. So the process starts when an author submits an article to a journal for assessment. And there will be some initial checks to make sure that the article fulfills the basic requirements for the journal and that all the required information is included. And if those checks are okay, then the editor will usually make an initial assessment on whether the article is a good fit for the journal and suitable for peer review. Now, if the editor has concerns or feels that the article in question is not suitable for the journal, then they would reject at this point. And this is called a desk reject, and it's usually made pretty quickly. But if they feel that the article can proceed, then it will be sent out to external reviewers. And there are usually at least 2 reviewers who give comments on an article, and these reviewers are selected to be independent experts. Once the reviewers have made their assessment, the article goes back to the editor with their comments, and the editor makes a decision on whether the authors need to revise their article, whether it should be rejected, or whether it's suitable for publication. Just to note, very few articles are suitable for publication immediately, and in most cases, there needs to be at least some revisions in response to comments from the reviewers. Now, focusing on the peer review stage specifically, as a reviewer, it's really important for you to know what type of review the journal that you are reviewing for uses. So the most common type of peer review, which you might come across, is single anonymous or single blind peer review. So in this model, the reviewers know who the authors are, but the authors do not know who the reviewers are. Although this is the most common approach to peer review, there are some concerns about whether this approach does enough to prevent bias in the peer review process. If the reviewers know who the authors are, then could their identity unfairly affect the reviewer's opinion in any way? So one approach to addressing concerns about potential bias is double anonymous or double blind peer review, where the authors don't know the identity of the reviewers and the reviewers don't know the identity of the authors. And this is a type of peer review that all 7 of the Operational Research Society journals use. The argument for this approach is that the reviewers will assess the article on the basis of the research alone because they don't know the identity of the authors. Now, another approach to address potential bias in peer review is to completely open up the process. In open peer review, the reviewers know who the authors are, and once the review process is complete, the authors will know the identity of the reviewers. Some journals also publish reports written by the reviewers with the published article. The idea behind this approach is to increase transparency so that everyone knows what the reviewer said about the published paper and sometimes who said it. And evidence also suggests that reviewers provide more details to support their comments in open or transparent peer review, which can be beneficial for authors. Open or transparent peer review does not affect the quality of the peer review report. And you can see some examples of open peer review in our F1000 platform. It's a really great place to see the peer review process live. And I'll share a link to that platform at the end of the presentation. And then the European Journal of Higher Education has introduced transparent peer review. And I'll show some examples of that later in the presentation. And I should note here, we will be sharing all of these slides with you. So you'll have those links later on. Considering all the expectations which are placed on reviewers, you might be left with the question, well, why should I be a peer reviewer? Or what are the benefits of being a peer reviewer? Surveys have indicated that the majority of researchers get involved in peer review because they feel that it is a part of their role as an academic and due to the interest in the articles that they're sent to assess. However, there are also some potential indirect benefits in terms of the connections which can be made during the peer review process. Many researchers also find that reviewing others' work improves their own writing. It's an opportunity to consider how reviewers might view your own article and to develop an alternative perspective. It can also be the case that when journals are recruiting new members to their editorial boards, that they will look at those who have been frequent reviewers for them and ask them if they would be interested in becoming a board member. Now, in addition to the indirect benefits, many journals will also provide some recognition to those who are involved in the peer review process for them. The precise details will depend on the journal, so it's important for you to look at either the journal website or the invitation email for specific information. Some journals may offer access to journal content or recognition, such as a published thank you, listing all those who have reviewed for the journal over the previous year, or a certificate. And you see an example of that on the slide here. As well as offering these kinds of awards, many journals also support reviewers in linking their review activity to their Publons or ORCID profiles. And this enables researchers to share that they have completed a review for a particular journal without sharing the details of the article itself, and thus gain recognition for their contribution as a reviewer. So we're now going to move on to what we need to consider when we receive an invitation to review. So So I've mentioned the editor a couple of times already, but who do I mean, and who else might be involved in this process? Well, different journals will have different editorial structures. On some journals, there might be a single editor-in-chief who handles all aspects of the journal and inviting reviewers, while in other journals, there may be subject-level editors, such as section editors or associate editors, who directly oversee articles in their subject area. Or in the case of some of the journals I've worked with in Scandinavia, they might oversee articles from the different countries. So there'll be a country editor. So there's all different models out there. Or there might be a guest editor overseeing some articles in a journal. Whichever editor is inviting you to as a reviewer, they'll likely be looking, primarily be looking at potential reviewers by searching published literature for people whose publications as an author show that they're an expert in that area. Editors might also use other approaches to find reviewers, such as searching their journal databases or using AI tools. But if they're not already familiar with your expertise as a potential reviewer, then it's likely that they will aim to judge this from what you have published as an author and possibly any other information that they can find about you on your institutional website or online profiles. So if you're interested in receiving invitations to review, then it's a good idea. Then it's a really good idea. Sorry, that slide always automatically goes forward for me. So if you're interested in receiving invitations to review, then it's a good idea to keep your online presence up to date with your expertise and any subject keywords that describe your interests. Each journal will have its own criteria for selecting peer reviewers in terms of their level of expertise and number of publications. The key aspect here is that the editor does need some way to be able to determine your expertise to assess the article. Now, in terms of publications, editors would ideally like to see a recent publication, a recent series of publications. They would like to know that you are currently active and up to date on the current research. Now, typically the journal will invite people to review via email. So do look closely at the invite, as it will have important information in it, which you will require, such as the name of the journal, the title and abstract of the articles they would like you to assess, and other core information, such as the type of peer review the journal uses and the deadline, i.e., how long you will have to assess and write the report if you agree to review the paper. So before you agree to review, you should look at all this information and consider whether you can review the article. In particular, from the title, abstract, and any other information the editor has provided, do you think you have the expertise required? Now, we noted earlier that the editor will be aiming to assess your expertise from information like your previous publication. So have they assessed your expertise correctly? Keep in mind that for some research, such as interdisciplinary research, the editor may have to invite several different reviewers to assess different aspects of an article. So consider whether there is a particular method or technique which the editor may want your views on, such as statistical or ethnographic methods. If you're unsure, you can always contact the editor and ask why you've been invited if you feel like the article is outside of your discipline. It's also important to consider whether you may have a conflict of interest regarding the article. That is, any connection with the article, the authors, the subject area, or funding, which could affect your assessment and mean that you cannot provide an unbiased report. And if you cannot review for any reason, then it's absolutely fine to say no. The editor, of course, will be hoping that you would accept the invitation, but they would prefer a quick decline rather than a report which does not help them to make a decision. And when you respond to the invitation, you may have the option to choose either decline or unavailable. Now, decline will indicate to the editor that you would not have agreed to review the article at any time. Maybe your expertise is not right, or you may have a conflict of interest, which means you couldn't review. You might be able to give a reason for declining, which will enable the editor to match your expertise better next time, or you can update your keywords in the peer review system. Alternatively, if you say unavailable, then you're indicating to the editor that you would not have reviewed the article, that you would have reviewed the article, sorry, but you're just not available right now. This can also be helpful for the editor, as they will know that they should consider you for similar articles in the future, or if they're struggling to find reviewers for the current article, then they may get back to you with an extended deadline. You can also proactively send a note to the editor if you're interested in reviewing the article, but you just are really busy, and you can ask them for an extended deadline. They might agree to that. And when the editor invites someone as a reviewer, they will have some expectations around what the reviewer will bring to the peer review process. And the author and readers will also have expectations of the reviewers. For the editor, they will hope that the reviewer will provide a report which will give them the information they need to make a decision about the article, while the authors will be looking for constructive and helpful feedback. The readers of the journal will be looking to the reviewers to provide a thorough assessment of the article, which means that they can trust what's been published, and also that what is finally published includes all the required information for the work to be clear and understandable. And that's really the primary goal of being involved in peer review, to provide an assessment which helps to ensure that well-done research is communicated clearly to those who need the information. So when you receive an invitation to review, consider whether there is anything which could bias your review and whether you could review in the time frame expected. It's also important to remember that the review process is confidential from the moment that you receive the invitation. So you should not share the details of the article that you've been sent to review with anyone without discussing it with the journal first. If you want more detailed guidance on the important considerations when being a peer reviewer, then I would recommend the COPE Ethical Guidelines for Peer Reviewers, which are a really fantastic resource. And I've included a link to that on the final slide as well. Next, we'll discuss what happens after you accept an invitation. So what is important to look for when assessing an article? During the assessment of an article, there will be 4 things which you will broadly be looking for as a peer reviewer. First, and perhaps most important, is the validity of the study. It is important to determine whether the research has been soundly conducted and whether the conclusions are appropriate for the results obtained. Secondly, you'll be looking for overall quality of the presentation. Overall, as a reviewer, it's not your responsibility to copy edit the paper, but you should be looking at whether the presentation enables the research to be understood. And then third, you will be looking at the contribution of the research, determining if this work is adding to the knowledge of the research community. And then finally, some journals may also wish you to comment on the novelty of the research and whether this is a unique contribution. But not necessarily all journals. Some will just want to know if the research is sound. And this information might be shared in the invitation, or you will be able to find it on the journal website, or in the aims and scope statement, and or in the instructions for authors. Now, I have very deliberately separated out research significance from novelty here, because a piece of work could be significant if it provides a replication of a previous finding, proving that it is reproducible. That might not count as original, but it is certainly important. And different journals will emphasize different areas they want you to look at, with some primarily focused on the validity of the research and others wanting more details on the originality. But before you start looking into the detail of the article, it's important to consider what type of research or article you've been sent to review. And it's likely that the majority of the articles you will receive will be research articles. But whether the research is empirical or theoretical will affect how you consider the article. If you're looking at empirical research, where there has been data collection and analysis, then the methods used for that will be a key aspect of your analysis. By contrast, for theoretical research, the consideration as a reviewer will not be on data collection, but rather on the theoretical framework and the flow of the argument of the paper. Peer review in this context is less about verification and more about discussing the concepts and assertions in the article. And although the majority of articles you receive to review will be research articles, you might also be sent other types of articles to review. And it's important to check what type of article it is before you start, as again, what you will want to focus on in your report may be different. If you aren't sure what the requirements are for a particular type of article, then a great resource is the journal's instructions for authors. Those should detail the different types of articles that the journal will consider and any specific points you might need to consider in your review. So taking some time to work out what type of article you're assessing or the type of research is all about getting an overview of the article before digging into the detail. It's also a good idea to get an overall sense of the flow of the article before you start. So look at the key elements, in particular, the abstract, the introduction, methods and figures, if you're assessing empirical research, and the conclusions. That should give you an outline and a sense of what the paper is focused on. Then I would recommend reading the paper all the way through, not going into the detail yet, but again, getting an overview and a sense of the flow and the key assertions of the paper. And once you have this overview, it will be easier to go through the paper in more detail, section by section, looking at the different elements and making the detailed notes which will form your report. So once you have an overview of the article, it's time to assess in greater detail. And I've already mentioned that you need to consider whether you're assessing empirical or theoretical research. And I just want to go into a bit more detail about what you might expect from each of these different types of research. If you're assessing an empirical research study, then what the authors have reported in each section of the article will be important. As you look through the paper in detail, you can consider what is required from each section and what you should be able to understand from reading that section. Overall, the four main sections of the paper, the introduction, methods, results, and discussion, you're expecting to be able to see why the study was relevant, what the authors did, what they found, and then a balanced discussion, which is based on the results obtained and answering in some way the question posed at the beginning of the article. So to help with this process, Taylor & Francis has created a number of checklists for different types of articles and research. And I'll share the link on the final slide, but you can also find a link on the ORS Society Becoming a Reviewer page as well, if you've seen that page. So besides the abstract, the first part of the article you're likely to assess is the introduction. The introduction should provide readers with the information needed to understand the study and the reasons why the authors conducted their experiments or the study. It should give the background of the research and summarize the current state related to the topic. The introduction should introduce the gaps and limitations in the current understanding or conflicts in current knowledge, but it's not meant to be a literature review. Finally, the introduction should clearly state the research question, set out the aims of the study, and why the study was carried out. Next, let's take a look at the methods section. The quantitative methods section should be reproducible, scientifically sound, reliable, and following best practice. All of the different elements need to be assessed. So the tools, the study details, sample collection, design principles, statistical analysis, ethical concerns, and so forth. And if any software has been used, it should be clearly described and available for readers to replicate the study. Likewise with data. If the journal has an open data policy, it should be available in an established repository. This won't be relevant for all types of research, especially within the social sciences and humanities, but it might be the case for those that are data heavy, such as economics. And again, this information will be available on the journal website under the instructions for authors. And just to note, while the ORS Society journals don't require authors to make their data available, they do encourage it. So for each detail, we can ask some questions to help understand if the paper needs revisions. And here's some examples from the checklist here. So are the study design and methods appropriate for the research question? Is there any potential bias in the sample or recruitment of participants? Are there any ethical concerns? That sort of thing. But those checklists are a nice resource to help guide you as you assess those different sections. Within empirical research, or if you're in the social sciences and humanities or other fields, it's also likely that you will see articles presenting qualitative data. Examples of qualitative data would include results from surveys or focus groups, and a lot of the aspects you'll need to think about will be the same as other empirical research articles. But in your analysis of the methods of a piece of qualitative research, you will want to consider elements such as the sample size and how participants were approached, and whether there could be any bias in the sample. Also, whether the questionnaire or other tools used have been validated. We've been discussing empirical research, but you may be asked to review a theoretical paper. For theoretical research, the most important elements for you to assess as a reviewer will be around the flow of the paper. In some ways, structure is even more important in theoretical research than empirical. The author can organize the paper around different themes, schools of thought, time periods, etc. But there needs to be a strong structure that supports the main objectives of the work and the overall argument. Some of the points you may want to consider are whether the authors have placed their topic in the appropriate wider context, or whether their argument progresses in a clear manner. You'll want to see that the conclusions are derived from the main discussion, with any limitations or open questions addressed. And the kinds of questions you'll want to ask yourself as a reviewer will depend on the overall, on the type of work you'll be assessing. But overall, you'll be considering whether the work is clearly presented and that any limitations are clearly stated. You'll also want to make sure that researchers here have either utilized existing arguments or schools of thought, or if they disagree, shown their awareness of this and rationalized their decision in a rigorous and a robust fashion. You don't necessarily need to agree with their conclusions so long as their justification for the argument is sound. So I'd like to briefly address the literature review, as we often have questions about it. While most published articles contain review of previous contributions to a research area, literature reviews are quite central to humanities and social science papers. Literature reviews should be well structured and focused on the main themes of a paper. They're the foundation of the paper in many ways, showing where the article is making contribution to the field, who it's in conversation with. And as a reviewer, you should be looking to see what the reviews contain you should be looking to see that the reviews contain references to foundational studies on the topic of the paper, but also feature recent contributions to the subject area. If the citations are all rather old, the paper is likely missing key developments in the field. You'll also want to pay attention to irrelevant referencing. Every reference should be supporting the overall objectives of the argument of the paper. And the last area I'd like to focus on is the discussion and the conclusions. So the discussion and conclusion should tie all the different parts of the paper together. For the discussion, you should be assessing whether the author has interpreted what they found in a sensible manner and linked their findings to other work in the area, either contrasting or supporting it. There should be links back to the literature review in terms of the work they're comparing their findings to. You'll want to ask yourself whether the conclusions are supported by the data or discussion provided in the article. In a strong paper, the discussion and the conclusions will correspond with and bolster the aims presented in the introduction and supported by the literature review and method sections. New ideas or objectives shouldn't be introduced at this point. The conclusion ideally would be in dialogue with that introduction. The conclusion is also an area where the authors can articulate the limitations of the research and consider next steps. So you will need to consider if there are limitations to the work and if the authors have noted that in the conclusion. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share some examples of reviewer comments from articles in F1000 research. So for F1000, the peer review is fully open and available online. And as you can see, the reports are citable. And this is a great resource if you want to see the peer review process happening live, as the responses from the authors are also included. So I'd encourage you to follow the links to these reports after the session to look at the comments that I'm showing in context. We'll also see some examples from the European Journal of Higher Education, which, as I mentioned earlier, practices transparent peer review. All of the articles published from the last year include anonymized peer review reports published as supplemental files so that you can see the reviewers' comments and recommendations for publishing. And I'll have the links to those reports too so that you can go read the full reports. In this first slide, I've included one of the points relating to the methods section of an article from this report. The comments are focused on asking the authors to provide more details about the research done. The reviewer has included a reference to support their questions, and it's clear that adding these details to the article will help the reporting of the study. So I'll just give you a second to look at that. In this slide, both of the comments, the reviewers are asking questions to clarify details in the article. And this is a common request that reviewers make and highlights that as a reviewer, many of the comments that you make to authors are likely to be in the form of questions. You'll be asking questions that anyone reading the work might ask so that they can be clarified before publication. You may notice that the comments from the second report included here are quite direct, and we will come back to phrasing comments in a bit, but it is useful to note that the reviewer could potentially have phrased these comments in a slightly different way, still raising the same question, but using less critical phrasing. In one of the examples, the report included references to backup comments, and it may be that as a reviewer, you think that the authors have missed some key references. This leads us to a really interesting question of whether you think it is suitable as a reviewer for you to ask the authors to cite your own work. So take a minute to consider this. Do you think that it is okay to ask the authors to cite your own work as long as they can't identify who you are? Do you think that it's never okay? Do you think that it is okay as long as the papers are relevant to the article? Or do you think it's okay as long as you don't ask them to cite too many? It is okay to recommend that the authors cite your article, but only if it's relevant and will strengthen the paper. You've been chosen to review the paper because you are an expert in that area. So there's a good chance that you might have a paper that should be cited. But really consider before suggesting it. You don't want to recommend that they cite your paper just to increase your H index. It really should be strengthening that paper in some way. Having considered looking at the different sections of the article, I want to now focus on a few general questions about what you should be looking for as a reviewer. And one question which comes up is to what extent reviewers should assess language in an article. When you receive an article to review, it's natural that you may notice errors in spelling or grammar. However, as a reviewer, correcting these aspects of an article shouldn't be your main focus. As long as the research is understandable, the editor needs your expertise on the details of that research, and copy editing can be done later by the journal if needed. If you do have concerns that the language in the article makes the research hard to understand, then you can let the editor know that language revisions are required in your comments. Alternatively, if you're having trouble reviewing due to the language, then you might wish to contact the editor and recommend that some language revisions be completed before further review takes place to enable the research to be clearly understood. Another question which is frequently discussed is what is the role of the peer review in detecting unethical behavior? And we've all seen cases where published papers have been retracted due to concerns about data, overlap with previous work, or other issues. Recently, it's been kind of the rise of the paper mill. It is hoped that such issues will be identified in advance through the assessment process of the journal. But what is your role specifically as a peer reviewer? So overall, As a reviewer, you should not feel under pressure to identify all issues relating to ethical concerns or misconduct. The primary purpose of peer review is to assess the quality and validity of the research presented, and reviewers are not expected to identify all potential ethical issues. However, it's also the case that as a peer review, you're looking at that article very closely, and it is possible that you will therefore identify problems which others have missed. So it's important to know what you might see and what action you should take. So here are some potential problems you might come across. There will be issues with the research and writing process, such as fabrication or falsification of data, plagiarism, and research ethics related to how the study was conducted. Then we have publishing misconduct, which could be submitting the same article to a number of journals at the same time, or other types of misconduct, such as authorship issues or not stating conflicts of interest. Now, unfortunately, these are just few of the issues that we see on a regular basis, but these do tend to be the most common ones we see. If you do think that you see any of these issues, then the only thing you need to do is contact the journal with your concerns. As a reviewer, you should not be investigating potential ethical concerns yourself, and you should just let the journal or the editor know your concerns using very neutral language so that you're not accusing the author of anything. And you should then let the journal investigate. If your concern is very immediate, then you might email the journal directly. Alternatively, you might include some details in your confidential comments to the editor as a part of your report. For example, some reviewers ask me if they should be running articles through plagiarism detection software themselves to check for potential issues. And the answer is no. The journal will run these types of checks as required. The key responsibility for you as a reviewer is just to let the journal know if you notice anything which concerns you about an article that you're assessing. So we've covered how to assess an article, what criteria you should focus on, and some of the responsibilities you have as a peer reviewer. Now we're going to focus on how to write a report. So when you write a report, usually you will need to complete it in a review form in the online peer review system for the journal. And even if you plan to write your report and then paste it in, it can be helpful to look at the form in advance so that you know exactly what questions the journal wants you to answer. In some cases, review forms may have structured questions which you need to answer. And then in other cases, there may be a free text box for comments to the authors and to the editors, which are confidential, and then an opportunity to give an overall recommendation. So here I'm going to primarily focus on how to structure a report where you have a free text option for your comments. But it is important to look carefully at the requirements of the journal you're reviewing, just to make sure that you're covering all the topics that the editor needs you to. First, let's consider the comments to the authors. If you've been given a free text box, then it's helpful for both the editor and the author if you structure your comments. Some reviewers add headings, some follow a structure but don't explicitly include those headings. I would recommend that you start your comments with a brief summary of the research. This helps to focus your review and show that you've understood the work which has been presented. One approach is then to detail any comments which you have as major or minor comments. So major comments would be any significant queries which you have about the article. These would be essential points that the authors need to address before the article can proceed, like problems with the study design or issues with overall presentation of the research, interpretation, analysis, or the data. Minor comments would be points which aren't essential for the validity or reliability of the study, but which would improve the work. For example, if there are any missing references or any technical clarifications needed, or if there's unclear labeling of figures and tables. Now, an alternative approach is to structure a report giving headings for the different sections of the article, and then to group the comments together which are relevant for each section. This is also a really great approach. And if you choose to group your comments by section, then do make it clear to the authors and the editor which of your comments are essential for them to address and which are minor comments. So here's an example of a polite, well-organized, and specific report. It's clearly structured using the section heading approach. And this example starts and ends with summaries. And the bullet points, specific comments under each section, giving page and line numbers to help guide the authors. So I'll give you a moment just to take a look at that one. Remember that the purpose of the comments to the authors is both to help the authors to improve their article and to give the editor key information about the work so that they can make an informed decision. The comments are addressed to the author, but the editor can also see these comments. So you don't need to repeat the comments that you've made to the author in the comments to the editor box. When you're writing your comments, consider the fact that you are aiming to be constructive. So think about what will help the author to identify what they need to do. Being specific and referring to specific page and line numbers is in an article can be really helpful. Also, consider that the authors are likely to be writing a point-by-point response to your comments, which you might be assessing at re-review. So numbering your comments can also be a really helpful way to enable that ongoing conversation, communication between you and the author. Moving on to the comments to the editor, these are confidential and so will not be passed on to the authors. So they're an opportunity for you as a reviewer to raise any issues that would not be appropriate to raise directly with the author. So for example, you could make a more general comment about the suitability of the article for the journal. Alternatively, if you have any concerns regarding the ethical aspects of an article, then you can raise these in the comments for the editor. Bear in mind that these comments will not be passed on to the authors, and also that the editor can see the comments to the authors. You don't need to duplicate details here, which you've already put in your comments to the authors, but equally, don't put in something here in your comments to the editor, which the authors need to directly address. This space is specifically for issues which should only be raised with the editor. It's also important to note that you don't need to make any specific comments to the editor if you don't have anything to add to your comments that you've made to the authors. In most systems, the comments to the editor box will be optional, so it's okay to leave it blank. So in addition to providing comments, many journals will also ask you to give an overall recommendation on whether you think the article should be published by selecting from a number of different recommendation terms. So the next aspect for us to look at is what these recommendation terms are and how to use them. It will depend on the specific journal, exactly what the recommendation terms are and whether these are seen by the author or just the editor. So most recommendations follow 4 categories: accept, minor revisions, major revisions, and reject. Though some journals will also have reject and resubmit recommendation term or something similar. So you want to read the options carefully, and the key thing is to ensure that your recommendation reflects the type of concerns that you've raised and indicates to the editor what you think the next step should be. For example, if there are only some clarifications required, which you feel that the author can easily address, then you'll probably want to recommend minor revisions. If you have questions which are essential for the authors to address in order for the article to be considered a sound piece of research, then you may want to recommend major revisions. Whether you recommend minor or major revisions can also be an indication to the editor about the level of further assessment that might be needed after the authors have made changes, and how confident you are that the article is likely to be suitable for publication. Major revisions indicates that you're not sure if the article will be suitable or not, and that the revisions need to be carefully assessed before a final decision is made. Sometimes it can be difficult to choose between different recommendations, in particular between major revisions or reject recommendation. The key question to ask yourself is how long the revisions are likely to take and how reasonable it is that the authors would be able to complete those revisions. For example, if you think the authors need to do a small additional survey, but it would be quick and easy to complete, and they're likely to have the resources available to do it, then major revisions would be a reasonable recommendation. However, if there was a problem which meant a major part of the article needs redoing, which might take more than, which might take a significant amount of time, or where the authors might not be able to make the change, then recommending rejection is suitable. Essentially, if you think that the authors could make the changes in a reasonable amount of time, then recommending revisions is fair. So here's an example of a report from the European Journal of Higher Education, which uses transparent peer review. The report is clearly structured and would be really helpful to an author. And you'll notice for the methods section, the reviewer provides page and line numbers to help the authors identify the area's concerns. Now, I appreciate that there's a lot of text on this slide, but I just wanted to give you an example of how you can structure a report. And as said, we will share these slides so you can take a closer look later. And here's an example of a poor report. To begin with, it's not very specific and it's inconsistent. The recommendation and the comments don't match up. The reviewers ticked reject and resubmit, but only minor comments about the references have been made. You can also see that the comments to the author have been unnecessarily repeated in the comments to the editor. And as I mentioned, since the editor can see the comments to the author, that's absolutely unnecessary. Here's a much better report, and this is an example from the European Journal of Higher Education. So in this report, the reviewer has recommended approval after revisions with no changes. And it's a brilliant example of the right way to do this. When there are no changes, sometimes the reviewers just give the editor one-line feedback saying that everything's fine, which leaves the editor and the authors wondering if the reviewer really read the work. Here, the reviewer has taken the time to give some comments on how the author has improved the paper, which is also really encouraging for the author, but also demonstrates that the reviewer has read and understood the article. So it's clear that the recommendation is based on a thorough assessment. So I just have a few final thoughts on being a reviewer. First, when you're completing your comments, it's good to make sure that you review as you would want to be reviewed. The peer review process can feel very challenging from an author's perspective, as all of you probably well know. When you're reviewing, consider what it would be like to receive that report as an author. Would it be helpful and encouraging and help you to improve your work if you were the author? If not, then consider whether you can address your comments in a different way. In short, you want to avoid being that notorious reviewer number 2. Right. After you have, sorry, I'm missing something here. After you and your fellow reviewers finish your reports, and all the review reports will be sent to the editor, and then they will make a decision on the article. It's important to remember that whatever your recommendation, the editor will make the final decision on your next steps for the article. That outcome may align with your recommendation, or they might decide that the authors could be given an opportunity to revise when you've recommended reject. The editor will be considering the views and comments of all the reviewers, as well as their own assessment and knowledge of the journal. So don't be offended if they decide something different to you. If you have concerns that the editor might have missed something important, then you can always contact them politely and ask for some information about their decision. Everything that we've talked about so far has been focused on the first time that you see a particular article for review. However, after the authors have responded to your comments and made revisions, the editor may ask you to re-review to see whether your concerns have been addressed. At this stage of the process, the focus should be on addressing the author's response to the original concern. So it's best if you do as it's best for you to do this as the original reviewer, as wherever it's needed. The editor doesn't want to have to find new reviewers at this stage, and it should be considered a part of the original commitment to review. On this slide, you can see a comment and response for an article in F1000 Research, where the author has provided an explanation. Remember that if the author has not made a change you asked for, then assess their explanation neutrally and don't take it personally. They might have a good explanation for doing something different. Also, you don't want to raise new concerns at the review stage unless it's about something that is either very critical to the soundness of the article or you could not have seen it in the first review. For example, if the authors added new data or new interpretations in the revisions. As an author, you don't want to be stuck in that cycle of continually responding to changing reviewer comments, which you could have addressed in an earlier revision. And as a reviewer, agree to re-review and focus on the changes made and avoid putting authors in that position. So we are coming to an end of the presentation now, and I just wanted to summarize the top 10 tips for being an effective reviewer to take away from this session. First, it's okay to say no to an invitation. Editors will hope for you to say yes, but if you cannot review, then they would rather that you quickly decline the invitation. And if you do agree, then start by getting an overview and then get into the details, paying particular attention to the elements that are important for the type of research, whether that be empirical or theoretical. So literature reviews, methods, data, materials, discussion section, etc. Clearly structure your report, starting with a summary and making it clear which comments are essential to address. And when you're writing your report, think about what it would be like to receive that report as an author and review as you would want to be reviewed. And finally, if you have any problems or questions, get in touch with the journal as they're there to help you. So again, here are some of those resources I've mentioned in the presentation today. And I've also included my email address if you want to get in touch after this session. So with that, I will stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Victoria. That was really helpful to set the scene, and you've covered a lot of detail there. So I think personally it was really helpful to kind of see those review comments on screen. So yeah, real encouragement to go look at some of those journals operating that open review process, because I think you can get out a lot of insight into, you know, the variety of review comments are given and how effective, you know, well structured and thought through review comment is, and you kind of see how that leads to the paper development. So
yeah, it's really, I encourage you to go, even though it's outside of your subject area. I found it so interesting to look at that European Journal of Higher Education, because you do see all the different styles that people use to write reports. And also with those reports, they have the whole phase. So the first report, and then, you know, how they respond to the reviewers' comments. So it is really an interesting place to explore.
Yeah, brilliant. So we'll start the sort of second part of the session shortly. In the next few minutes, we'll move on to the panel session. We've got our editors waiting in the wings. We'll just pause for a couple of minutes. If anyone needs to go and grab a drink or you know, answer the door to deliver a package or something like that, then you can do that now. We've got a few questions that have come through. One was around the slide deck. So as we mentioned, that's going to be shared after the event. Someone's just said, thanks very much, Victoria. That was really helpful. And just to that, I'll just say that after the event, we'll be sending around a survey. So if there are things that you think afterwards, actually, it would be really helpful if we, you know, spoke about that, or maybe, you know, we could pitch it in a bit more detail or less detail, then you can let us know through that mechanism. We've also had a question around someone submitted anonymously, that's around certificates. So I'm not quite sure what you mean in that sense, but I'm going to answer it in two different ways. As I mentioned, we'll be sending around a post-event survey. So in that, we'll have an option for you to request a certificate of attendance, if that will be helpful for you in your sort of professional development. However, your question might have actually been around review certificates, so certificates of reviewing. And if you have reviewed for the Operational Research Society journals, then every year anyone who's reviewed for one of the journals will get a certificate of reviewing from the society, in addition to the kind of emails that come from the system. So that typically occurs at the end of November. So we have a sort of phased window, but every year any reviewer who's submitted a review will get a certificate of reviewing. And if those reviews are particularly helpful and strong and help the editors make a good decision, then we've got different grades. So you might get a certificate of outstanding review. There's one further question from Dr. Abraham, which I'll actually hold on to because I think it might be useful for the panel session.
Yeah, I was thinking so too.
Yeah, great. So, great. I think we're pretty much all here. I will encourage the editors to turn their cameras on now. Kathy, great, nice to see you. And we've got Martin Kunk and Nav Mustafi here with us as well. And Antti Lundqvist is maybe en route, but if he comes in, I'll welcome him shortly. So the second part of the how to be an effective peer reviewer session is an editor panel. So we can have some fun with this. We'll very much encourage you to submit questions. Can be practical, nuts and bolts things. It could be kind of thoughtful things, suggestions, questions that you've been waiting to answer. And I'm sure one of our panelists will have some insight and experience on that. And obviously the reason we've invited editors is because they've got this kind of dual aspect to the review process, or even a sort of triple aspect to the process, not only as reviewers, but also as editors. So there's kind of different hats you can wear, and I think that gives you a sort of a more holistic understanding of the process. As I mentioned, all of the panelists are editors-in-chief of one of 7 of the Operational Research Society journals. And great, we've got Andy. Very, very, very warm welcome to you. And please come on screen when you're ready. We'll do a quick round of introductions. And I haven't prepped any of the editors on this, but what I thought you could do as I introduce you is just note sort of your title, your research area, and maybe you could quickly sort of reference maybe your first publication, where that was published, or maybe even your latest publication, if that was going back too far and you can't remember, just as a little kind of icebreaker. So Kathy, you're on my list. You're fortunately or unfortunately first alphabetically by surname. So Kathy is co-editor-in-chief of the Health Systems Journal. And I'll hand over to you, Kathy, for a short introduction, and maybe you could just note, where was your first publication, or where was your most recent publication, and what it was on.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Kathy Kotiades. I'm a professor of operational research at the Kent Business School. And I just want to say that Victoria did a wonderful talk, and I agree with Martin. What else can we say after that talk? Not much, because you've really covered it all. I think I wanted to say that my area of research is it's really in healthcare, although I've expanded to include transport and energy and other things. But it's developing the simulation methodology in order for it to be fit to address problems in those areas. And I'm trying to remember where my first publication was, because I don't think it was in an OR journal. I think it was in more of a healthcare journal. So I'm going to leave that one, and I'll go to the first one that I actually remember writing more than the others, which was a paper for the Journal of the Operational Research Society. So Martin Kunk is now one of the editors for that. And I was I suspect that I had very recently finished my my PhD when I was writing that paper, and when I read it now, it puts a smile on my face because there are things obviously that I would have preferred to have written differently to what I wrote at that time. But I can tell you that I remember getting a major review for it, and it was almost a rejection. And I was obviously devastated. I thought the end of the world had come. And obviously I've had loads of major reviews since then, so I'm really comfortable with major corrections, and obviously with rejections as well. So all of these things as authors and as reviewers, they're just part of the process, and you have to accept them.
Brilliant.
So I'll leave somebody else to talk about something, so best to move on to another person.
That's great, Kathy. Thanks for that encouragement as well. It's yeah. Martin. Martin is one of the co-editors in chief of the Journal of the Operational Research Society, or JAWS, if you're in the know. Martin, over to you for a quick introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, my name is Martin Kung. I'm one of the 4 editors-in-chief of JAWS. More or less, we are divided by areas of specialization. In my case, I'm mostly focused on soft operational research, problem structuring methods, simulation, behavioral operational research, and some areas of application such as sport, defense, and analytics as well. Yeah, coming to the question, what was the meaning of meaningful publication? I had to go to my Google Scholar to check what I have written, and I started scrolling down. But clearly, it's a journey. When you start your PhD, it's nowadays I know that we supervisors put a bit more pressure than in my time to have something published, but I think publishing is a journey, and you have to start with what you can do and don't feel disappointed, because you learn a lot in the process. You understand the style of the journal, you understand more the feel, and what is the sort of the tacit aspects of any field that you decide to publish in. And clearly, I had many papers in journals that perhaps are not very popular, but they were a part of the learning curve, and I could find my first sort of meaningful paper was in JAWS. So there you go. 18 years ago, that was my first paper that I published with my supervisor at that time. So I hope I answered your question, Richard.
Yeah, great. That's brilliant, Martin. And that's nicely coincidental that it was in JAWS. And we're now moving on to Antti Lundqvist, is editor-in-chief of Knowledge Management Research and Practice. And Antti, over to you for your introduction.
Thank you. And let's first check, is everything okay with the video and audio?
Perfect.
Okay. I have a brand new laptop, and when I was opening the Zoom, it started installing, and it looked very weird in the beginning, but good. So I'm the other editor, in addition to Tom Jackson, in Knowledge Management Research and Practice, and basically knowledge management is my own research field, the core of it as well, at least. And well, I started my PhD project in about 25 years ago. So a lot of different publication attempts, similar to what Martin said. I think in the early stages, I was not too familiar with different types of journals. So some of the first publications were a little bit like getting to know the journal field, and publishing also in not so highly respected journals later on when I'm thinking about it. But anyway, it's part of the learning curve and kind of knowing your playing field. But I think one of, if not the first of my publications was about exploring internet and productivity. There was a new thing quarter of a century ago called internet, and there was a lot of promise that if companies start using the internet, for example, doing e-commerce, then there might be productivity consequences. And of course, nowadays this seems even self-evident or silly question, but at that time it was a fairly new technology. And I think that's a good example of what the journal Knowledge Management Research and Practice is doing. We are looking at the kind of intersection between management and information technology, or how we can use the knowledge, the valuable knowledge-related resources in companies and other organizations to create value. So that's a brief introduction from my side. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks, Antti. And last but not least, Nav, over to you for a quick introduction.
Thank you, Richard. So am I audible?
You were very audible.
Yeah. So my name is Nav Mustafi. I'm a professor of operations and analytics at the University of Exeter Business School and one of the 4 co-editors-in-chief of the Journal of Simulation. So my research is mostly in modeling methodologies, and I apply it to problems in healthcare, circular economy, and also other domains. So the question which was asked was about the first publication, and like Martin, I had to look back to see, and the first publication was actually a piece of work which I did for my master's dissertation when I was doing my master's in Brunel University, and the paper was published during my PhD, but the work was for the master's, and the journal was Simulation: The Transactions of the SCS. It is still it is a journal of the Society for Modeling and Simulation, and published by Sage. So my the journey, like the other editors have said, of the publication, it has, for me personally, it has been a bit different in the sense because my both my master's and PhD they were in applied computing and computer science, and so when I started my publication journey, most of the journals are applied journals, like computation and concurrency, simulation, transactions, and so on and so forth. And then when I moved on to the applications of simulation, then obviously in the business school context there are different sets of journals. Some of us will know the ABS rank, the ABS list of journals in operations research management science. So I kind of shifted my publications from more applied computing journals to journals such as JORS, Health Systems, European Journal of Operations Research, and so on and so forth. So personally, I mean, it has been quite interesting for me and has also opened up my thinking in terms of how you are able to bring together methods from different disciplines. It could be computer science with simulation and so on and so forth. So yeah, so that is what I have to say for now. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Great. Thanks very much, Nav, and it's great to have such a sort of spread of journals, different disciplines, different domains and methods covered by each of you in your journal. So thank you very much for joining us for the panel session today. We'll swing back to look specifically at peer review, and we've actually got a question in the chat which we'll come to very shortly. But just to start quite broad and looking at some sort of foundational aspects of peer review. And now this is kind of with your editor hat on, really, and it's really around sort of what are the key criteria you're looking at when deciding a route forward for a paper. Is it going through to accept or reject? What are the key criteria you're looking for there? And and how does peer review assist you in that process? And yeah, I think, Kath, you look like you were ready to go.
Yeah.
So please.
Okay. So when I look at a long list of papers and I'm going through and I'm deciding whether they will go to an area editor, whether they will be rejected, I open up the paper, I read the abstract, the introduction, I skim read the rest, and then I go to the bottom of the references and I have a really good look at what they've included, because for me, I get a lot of telltale signs about whether a paper will make it through a review by this sort of first look at it. So if I haven't got a feel that I know what it's contributing, that's obviously a big red flag. So if I don't know what is it that it's trying to do, you know, what is the main contribution of this paper? How is it going to add to knowledge? So that's you know, if I don't see it there, that's obviously a big red flag. The other thing that I look for is whether it's relevant to the journal. So sometimes, you know, with the journals called health systems, so some people may have something that's relevant, but they haven't written it in a way that makes it relevant to the journal. So if you're coming from the point of view that you're really, you've done something very methodological, but you haven't really thought about, yeah, you've said, oh yeah, this is really useful for healthcare, but you haven't really put that in there and demonstrated it, then it really isn't relevant for our journal. So that's obviously another big red flag. Then I look at overall the section to see if there's anything obvious that's missing. So sometimes, you know, for me, I quite often get papers that don't have any background literature section. They've just forgotten to say, where is this work coming? How are you building on knowledge? Where is this work coming from? Or sometimes they're completely missing a discussion. So those are other red flags. And then I look at the list of papers at the end, and I try and I look at what they're citing. So if I get a paper and it's only citing medical journals, for example, that to me is another red flag because of the scope of the journal, that it's, you know, I mean, the papers that I will kind of look at are the probably more relevant to operational research in healthcare, or systems thinking in healthcare or something like that. So if I don't see any papers on that, I think, well, you've probably written something that isn't that relevant to us. So on the balance of all of these red flags, I decide whether it should proceed or not. And when if I have to reject the paper, then I will write in the, you know, at this point, I will write a note and I will say, where is it? Why is it that it's been rejected? And, you know, so the authors know. And sometimes I will say to them, you know, you've got a lot of strengths here and we'd be interested in having another look at this paper, but can you please address this and then resubmit? And that is because I am ultimately trying to make the work of the area editor and the reviewers easier. So they get papers that are closer to what we're looking at. So their job is easier to refine them. So that's my bit.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I think that's you've sort of pointed us in a direction to highlight, you know, that review process is multi-layered. You've got, you know, that fairly robust, actually, you know, desk assessment process before it gets to subject editor and the reviewers. Martin, Nav, or Antti, do any of you have a sort of different framework for, you know, assessing manuscripts when they come in? And, you know, are there things that you really love to see in review reports? You know, when you send a paper out to review and they come back, sometimes it's a case of, oh, great, you've not really given me much to go by, but, you know, what do you really look for in a review report? What would be your sort of dream feedback?
So maybe I can go first. I always think of the Delphi approach when you know, looking at when the papers have gone out, and what we are trying to do is try to seek consensus, right? So when we are, because we are talking about a double anonymous system of review, obviously the authors will not know the reviewers, and the reviewers will not know each other. The associate editor will know. But again, when the review reports are coming in, what we are trying to do is trying to see that, okay, the reviewers are obviously very much experts in their field, but what is the consensus, right? And the consensus, and sometimes obviously there is no consensus, in the sense that somebody may say that certain points are are not relevant to the research question. Some are, but there will maybe some points where they both agree. And sometimes you get decisions which is one reviewer may say, reject, another one may say minor reviews. So as an editor, then I mean, you are looking at the review reports, and obviously the report from the associate editor, and trying to make a decision as to what is the correct disposition for the paper. But if we move forward then to the next round, that is very important, because then what is happening is that the reviewers are able to obviously see the review reports of the other reviewers, and then at that point in time, again, there is some consensus building which is happening, not at the editor's level, but at the reviewer level, because now they are seeing two other review reports, for example, and obviously we get it back, and then we are then able to make another judgment on the paper as to what should be the outcome, let's say. So I always apply this, the framework of a think about the Delphi approach, and and think how are we able to best navigate the paper, and try to seek out consensus as well, if at all possible. Otherwise, yeah, some papers are unfortunately will be rejected as well.
Thanks, Nav. Obviously, Nav's kind of picked up upon the fact that reviewers aren't always in agreement with each other, and sometimes I guess you come back where two people are recommending very similar things, which you've built consensus. But Martin or Antti, maybe this is a tricky one for you, but what kind of happens when you get situations where you've got reviewers at polar opposite ends of the spectrum, one really advocating for publication and one highlighting a whole host of perceived issues? What do you do in those kind of instances in peer review? I guess from an editor's perspective, how do you get a route forward for those types of papers? Antti, you look like you're smiling from experience.
Yeah, not an easy question to answer, but of course, depending on the case and depending on the reviewers' comments, of course, we need to carefully read and what they are saying. Sometimes one of the reviewers have maybe stronger arguments or somehow more valuable points. So maybe sometimes then it's easier to lean towards one of the reviewers, and maybe sometimes then it's just making some sort of decision and sending the paper for revisions, and then maybe as mentioned by Nav before, then hopefully there will be some consensus building when the reviewers see each other's comments, and of course it's also a learning possibility for the reviewers. They may have focused on certain points but missed something else, so maybe in the second round they will be more agreeable.
Great, thanks, Antti. And maybe Martin, you can kind of just round off this particular section and just sort of go back to what is it in a review report that you find most helpful as an editor? When you see those review comments come in, what is it that makes what is it that makes those really helpful versus comments that you can't really be used or actioned, and how can reviewers best help authors as well to improve their work?
Definitely the quality of a good review is It's based on really on the depth of that review. So when you start reading that reviewer's report, you can see that the reviewer went through each of the different components of the paper, identify some issues, many times major issues, but it's also as well constructive in the sense of giving some solutions to those problems in terms of extra work or corrections to do. Definitely, there can be cases where, yeah, reviewer decides that this paper should be rejected. In that case, clearly, it's also pay a lot of attention on the grounds for that rejection. What is the things that the paper has done bad that cannot be solved. But yeah, definitely after the desk rejection by me or any of the other editors, we hope that the reviewers really look at the way of improving the paper, unless they pick up some minor things that or some major things that we couldn't identify in the desk rejects part.
Thanks, Martin. Antti, you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, when I evaluate whether a paper is publishable or not, I think there are three main issues. And first one is the relevance or fitness to the journal. And I try to do that evaluation by myself during the desk review. And if it's not suitable, then it's just desk reject right away. But then where the reviews are really helpful is evaluating the two other points. One is the kind of technical quality of the paper. Is the methodology good? Are they citing relevant previous publications? And is the writing fluent and so on? So whether it's kind of technically good or not. But what is really valuable is somehow evaluating what is the novelty value of the study. What is new in the results? How is the paper or the findings, how they are helping to develop the research field further? And for example, in our journal, we have a lot of submissions coming in, and many of the submissions, they are technically very high quality, but somehow they feel that they are a little bit repetitive. We have already published quite similar papers, and they are adding only a little bit. So in a good review, they spot all the technical issues and help the authors develop the papers even better. But the great reviews, they somehow evaluate whether the novelty value is enough to merit publication. Because sometimes we must reject even technically very good papers, but such papers that are not really contributing so much to the existing literature.
Great, thank you all for that. Now we've got a few questions coming in on the chat and the Q&A, so I thought we might be able to pick up some of those. One of the open ones is from a researcher who's actually just about to embark upon their first review assignment, and I know, Martin, you sort of responded this in the chat, but I thought it'd be good to air it in the discussion. They've said, I'll assume peer review for the first time. I can understand the expectations of the editors from reviewers. However, from a reviewer's perspective, it's also a learning journey. So there was, I guess, just a little bit of sort of maybe anxiety at the end of this. They were just asking, how will it affect or impact the credibility of the reviewers if they, make some mistakes during the peer review process? So sort of a bit of apprehension about their first review assignment, and maybe, I don't know, the editors, you could offer some sort of words of wisdom or encouragement there. Kathy, you've got your hand up.
So the first thing is that well done for accepting to do this. If you've accepted, I haven't quite read the message, because this is also an important part of your development as an academic. So we all had to start at some point. And as editors, we appreciate that we will have people that are starting off and this might be their first review, and we have others that have done quite a few. So I think the information that Victoria gave in her slide, in her slides over the structure, those are very helpful. If you have an experienced colleague that has done a lot of reviews, you may want to talk to them as well. And they, I sometimes share, for example, templates that I have with others that are starting off. So make sure that you are supported while you're going through. But ultimately, you just have to be honest in your review. You have to write what you think, and we understand that it is what you think, and we don't just have one reviewer, we have others, sometimes two, sometimes three, that provide reviews. So we will look at it on balance. So there's nothing from your point of view to worry about if you have expertise in this field. Now, again, go back to what Victoria said earlier when she said, well, don't take it if you don't know anything about the area. But if you do know something about the area and you've been working in this, then your opinion is just as good as anyone else's. So I hope this helps.
Thanks, Kathy. And Nav?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, so once the reviews have come in, then of course, the associate editor or the editor-in-chief who will have access to all the reviews may sometimes, they will mention to the authors which particular parts of the reviews are really significant to be answered, right? So if a new researcher, if new reviewer is, if they want to be reassured, then there are, like Kathy said, there are multiple people looking at the papers, and again, sometimes some of the comments can also be edited. That sometimes happens when sometimes reviewers will include in the review certain papers to be referenced, right? And some of them may actually belong to too many may belong to the person reviewing the paper itself. So the editors have some facilities like editing some of the review comments, and so that could be used as well in order to provide the taking into account all the evidence from the reviewers, a very targeted response to the authors as to what changes are needed to be done in the paper. So there are multiple levels of safeguarding, if I can use that term.
Great, thanks very much, Nav. An interesting question here. There's a bit of a preamble, so let me run through this. I think it's a great question, actually. Here's the context. So I'd like your advice on a situation that I encountered while reviewing a paper. So the person in question was the second reviewer of 4, and had provided comments highlighting gaps in the methodology and suggested including some applications in the conclusion. So when the revised paper was submitted, that reviewer could see the feedback from the other reviewers, and actually the feedback was quite surprising. So one reviewer had really harshly criticized the study and said it was very similar to another paper, and the author had sort of defended their work. But the question they were asking was around, is it appropriate for a reviewer to be influenced by the comments of other reviewers? And should reviewers, revise up or down their opinions based on, the other reviewers' feedback? So I guess just before we take your answer, I think some journals will operate differently. So some journals will share review comments with other reviewers, and some won't. So this is not going to happen in all cases. But yeah, it's a great question there. Kathy?
I would say that you should not be influenced by other reviewers, by what they have written. This is what you think of the paper, not what the other people think of it. So, and it doesn't mean that the other person is correct or right in what they're saying. So you should, I think it's interesting because it's a learning opportunity for you to see, well, what else have they picked up on? but it doesn't mean that what they have picked up on or their assessment is correct. So I would say to avoid being influenced. And it's equally important for us as editors to have the truth come through. And we will, you know, if we have a very positive review and that's well justified, and then we have a very negative review that's very short, hardly anything there, we probably won't take the negative review into account. And we may even ask another reviewer to come on board to sort of see what they think, to get another opinion. So I think having a detailed review that you can stand by, that's justified with evidence, is better for us. That's it. That's my answer.
Yeah, that's great, Kathy. Thank you. Any other thoughts, Martin? You looked like you were you've experienced similar things and maybe have a view on it.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with what Kathy said. Definitely, each reviewer brings their own sort of judgment to the paper. They pick up different things, because even though they may be in the same field, they may have different experiences or different specializations. So it's okay if you diverge from another reviewer, and what we do as editor is really to balance across all the reviews. As Nav mentioned, it's like a Delphi process where we try to find the convergence between perhaps completely opposite reviews. Sometimes I have one that say accept, another said reject. And so then in that situation, well, I may ask 2 more reviewers and see if there is a sort of agreement in that sense. But clearly, a lot depends really on the perception. But another important thing to consider, that opinion of the review, is the quality of the review. Does this review show that they understand the paper, and they are making valid claims? So it's just quite a quick read, and just simply reject it for the sake of rejecting, or making hard criticism because they I don't know, other dimensions that are not the evaluation based on the evidence that they have, which is the paper.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So I think sort of from the view of the editor, you're sort of trying to untangle sort of subjective from the objective, and you'll have reviewer reports in varying depths, and actually the depth of the review gives more weight, maybe more trust in that review versus a very shallow sort of top level review. And you know, when you're looking at review reports, maybe it's a case of sort of trying to identify where the strongest, most convincing evidence-based argument is, and so I think that's sort of been highlighted there. And
Just a comment on this, Richard.
Oh, now please.
Yeah. So some journals will allow you to see that who the other reviewers are. I think Elsevier does that, right? So sometimes you are able to see the other reviewers who are doing the review, and in those cases, and because sometimes there might be a mix of reviewers, some may be early career reviewers and some may be expert with expert reviewers with their whole careers actually in that area. So in that cases, actually, it may become a bit difficult to hold your own ground. It doesn't always have to be the case, but when you are seeing the other experienced reviewer, what they are thinking about the paper, then you might be you may feel, but it doesn't have to be that way. But a system like what I think Taylor and Francis use, where you do not know who the other reviewer is, that helps in in holding your own ground. And as we discussed, that it is also finding consensus. And sometimes reviewers, when they look at other reviews, they think that okay, maybe there is another point to the paper, another direction that it could be taken. So it's not like you have to be like hold your ground or hold to the trench, right? there is possibility of some movement. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. There's a couple of practical questions, and maybe we'll come to Antti for your take on this. One was around sort of just how long one would typically spend on reviewing an article. You know, if it topic, and maybe where should most of the attention be given as a reviewer. I don't know. You know, if you're able to speak from your experience of how you review papers, maybe how you first started reviewing papers at the start of your reviewing journey to sort of your approach that you take now.
Well, I think maybe early on when I was doing my first reviews, I spent probably more time than I nowadays do. I read the paper very carefully from beginning to the end, and then maybe started the second round, and then making notes and observations, and of course it depends on the manuscripts where the problem areas are. Sometimes it's quite obvious that, for example, the introduction is not flowing very well. There is no research gap identified, or it's unclear what the research goals are, or how it's connected to the previous literature, or in some other paper it might be problems in methodology or so on. So it depends on how the paper is, but it's well, now that you know, I'm nowadays working as a dean, I'm quite busy, and when I try to be effective, so usually it's easy to focus on certain issues, like for example the introduction, how the paper is set up, how it's connected to the previous literature, and then looking at whether all the key components are there, and especially the previous or the bibliography, what kind of references are included, and is something very relevant missing, and what is the contribution, what is the novelty value. So I think it's just when you have the feeling that you understand what is the manuscript about, how it's flowing, what the authors are trying to say, and what are the problem areas, then you kind of identify what you need to say, and I think it depends on the manuscript how much text you need to produce. Sometimes it's not very long. Sometimes it may be like 1 page of comments, depending on kind of the maturity of the manuscript and so on. So not easy to say that it would be the same in each case.
Yeah, it's coming back to that idea of it being a learning journey, and over time you kind of pick up your own heuristics and frameworks for your to sort of formalize your thought process. So yeah, a case of it, just trial and improve iteratively as you go. Kathy and Martin, Nav, do you have a similar experience of to Antti?
Yeah, I'll just say very similar, and I want to echo what Antti was saying about when I started off reviewing, I took a lot more time in doing it, and I would probably go over the paper twice even to make sure. But I feel that there is a reciprocal benefit that when you're reviewing, you're learning how to write papers at the same time, because you're picking out the faults and think, well, I've got this, I do the same thing. So there's a bit of a learning churning. So you have to do more of that at the beginning. And I also want to say make one other point. If you want to publish in a particular journal and you're finding yourself being rejected, then your best strategy is to become a reviewer for that journal and understand it a little bit more. And through that process, you will probably understand the paper writing or their structure or their interests a bit more, and you're more likely to get into it. So, and the one thing we all need, without a shadow of a doubt, that myself, Nav, Martin, and Antti would have said, we need more reviewers. We absolutely need more reviewers. So if anybody were to write to us and say, I want to review for your journal, we would be ecstatic. it would never be an issue that you wanted to do it. So there are huge benefits to reviewers that are starting off in that journey, and not just, even if it's not your first review, but you want to start publishing in that journal, develop that relationship through reviewing. That is the first step into getting into a particular journal. So that's what I wanted to say.
That's great. A good plug there, Kathy. I'll certainly provide some details in about 10 minutes time of how you can express an interest in reviewing if you haven't already. So we'll come to that at the end. We've got 2 further questions waiting in the Q&A, and that will probably take us up to time, I think. One is kind of focusing on the review process still, and one's kind of looking to the future. So I think that would be a good way to conclude. So the first one is just commenting on the fact that, you know, during this discussion, it seems like it's you know, the fit of the paper in the journal is one of the sort of key criteria, not only whether it's methodologically sound or has a contribution, but actually that it slots into the existing discourse. And I guess for reviewers, should they be commenting on that, or is that something that's more for the editor? Kathy, please. And maybe
I'm sure we all want to talk on this one. For me, if you are submitting to a journal and you are not citing any of the papers in that journal because they're not relevant to your paper, then that's probably not the right journal for you. So for us, if you are not capturing conversations that are going on in our journal, you have missed the point of publishing in our journal. It is about creating conversations, and you are making our work easier if you cite our papers, because we're more likely to go, well, they're citing that paper, that person's published with us, I might go to them to be a reviewer. So it's fundamental to think about our journal and also similar journals to ours.
Thanks, Kathy. Martin, maybe we'll go to you and then Nav. Martin, I know you've got thoughts on this, and also when a paper's submitted as well to JAWS, looking at that, you know, that methodology in particular, and you know, what level of contribution needs to be made for the paper to be considered.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Definitely, I agree with Katie. What we are looking as editor is always to find a sort of conversation in our journal where you can see that authors always try to bring some novelty to existing research that has been published before. So clearly, if you send your paper that has been rejected in other journal to yours to try how it goes, definitely you will not have any clue of what is the current publications in yours, what is the current state of the art associated with yours. So therefore, how can you claim that your work is novel to the best of your knowledge, right? If you haven't read any papers. So clearly that's it's usual, very basic mistake of novel writers is they don't understand that when you are submitting a paper, the paper needs to make a clear contribution and be novel against what has been going on in the journal. And it's especially a novelty, not so much for JAWS, that is a methodological journal. Novelty in terms of the methodologies that we are publishing. So sometimes a paper just sent another application of the same methodology, and you can clearly see in the paper that they are just using the same algorithms, the same models without any sort of novelty or improvement. And it's just an application with a different set of data that in that case is not novel because it's just an application.
Yeah, so that's really helpful. Thank you both. And Nav, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, for JAWS, of course, you know, we look for, you know, it's good that JOS is cited, but we also have, I think, a more holistic view of the research area, because we have like 4 to 5 journals which are focused on simulation. So even if the author has not referenced JAWS, but is bringing papers which is adding to the discussion or contributing to the novelty, referring to other journals like ACM transactions or simulation transactions of the SCS and similar journals, then for us it is not that big a factor, because uh, obviously the conversations we are having in Journal of Simulation is also broader with the other journals in that area as well. And also the other thing I want to mention is the context of the use of the reference, right? So if, let's say, a JAWS reference has been used, at what level are they referring to an existing work and saying that this particular work had implemented a methodology, a framework, and then we are extending it? That's a good point of reference. But there are sometimes you see references which are introduced at a literature review reference, right? So you want to say that you have looked at the area, and okay, one of the journals publishing there is JAWS, and you put the reference there. So just having more references for the journal that you are submitting to will not actually, everything has to be seen in context, in proportion. And then I think that is the approach we take.
Great, thanks, Nav. I've got a couple of quick fire questions. One is just a frequently asked question is peer review a paid role? And in most cases, it's not. I know some journals are trialing it, but it's it's a voluntary contribution to the research ecosystem, the research community, and obviously as authors, every time you publish a paper, it requires an editor-in-chief, and often 2 or 3 reviewers. So it's a sort of mutually beneficial system. And linked to that, someone's asked, do you think an early career researcher with only a couple of published articles can be a reviewer? And I think this links in with that, in that if you're submitting papers for publication, it requires a reviewer. So the quicker you can get into the system and get experience, the better for everyone else who's also looking to publish. Kathy?
For us, yes, that's absolutely fine. And actually, we also encourage early career researchers during their PhD perhaps to join their supervisor in doing a peer review. So I think I don't think I probably would say maybe not your first year of your PhD, but when you're coming towards the end, I think at that point, it's part of your journey to becoming an academic, and you need to learn how to do it. So, there's a difficult point, just after you've got your PhD, you maybe don't have that many publications, you're feeling insecure, but I don't think that should stop you from reviewing.
Great. And maybe just to finish on, Antti, you mentioned in your introduction about the dawn of the internet, and we've seen many emerging technologies over the last 20 or so years, and obviously the internet goes back further than that. But I think something that we're seeing have a strong influence on publication and the peer review process is the explosion of generative AI. And I don't know if you've started to see this impact the review process, and does anyone have any thoughts about what review might look like given this technology sort of infiltrating every part of our life? Challenges and opportunities, observations, thoughts? Just a small question.
Well, if I start, of course, it's a huge question connected to every aspect of academic work. We are discussing in our university, for example, what to do with the master's thesis, because students are very, very creative in using generative artificial intelligence, and perhaps they don't use so much their own intelligence anymore. It's so easy to just create a text. But of course, we see same phenomenon with some of the manuscripts, and And for example, we identify this in terms of certain words becoming very popular in manuscripts. So, for example, like delve into is somehow now in many articles, researchers are delving into some discussions. So it's quite funny. And we know examples where even in a published article there is some of these like ChatGTP, these phrases are included in the text with the lazy copy paste style of doing the work. So of course, sometimes I feel tempted that it would be nice to just use ChatGTP to create a review report to save time. But of course, that's not what we are doing. We need to use our own thoughts and evaluation to do the work. But it's definitely something that is evolving, and we need to be conscious of what's happening. And but also I think it could be useful to explore a little bit what we can do with the new technology and how to save time, how to be more efficient and effective in doing the main part of our job.
Absolutely. I've even seen prompts being left in submitted work as well, which is concerning, I think. Kathy.
I wanted to pick up on the point of how these technologies might be useful for people in saving them time. I would say that for me personally, I have a tendency to be very direct, and when I'm writing, and get straight to the point, and perhaps not as polite as I've always liked to be. So I think for me, sometimes it's useful if I have time to pop some text into ChatGPT and say, make it more polite. So things like that, if you feel that your English is not great, or there's something more about the way you're expressing your own ideas, I think there can be merit there into using it, but I think it still has to be your own idea.
Great. I think that's a nice place to land it. Always be polite and professional, and remember that the behind that paper there's an author looking to advance in their career, and I think if that's your sort of guiding thought through the process, then that will lead to a good constructive review. Now we're at time, so I'll conclude the session then. Give a very warm thanks to our panelists, Martin, Kathy, Antti, Nav, and to Victoria presenter, and also the folk at the OR Society, so Chiara and Sophie, who's behind the scenes sorting out all our technical bits and pieces. As I mentioned, there'll be a post-event survey which will be coming out via email, so do let us know if that's been helpful. Maybe there's topics you'd like us to cover in future. I'm sure generative AI we could talk about for days. So survey, we'll be circulating the slides. There'll also be an option to request a certificate of attendance if that would be helpful for your career development. And if I've missed anything, Victoria, Chiara, or Sophie, do shout at me. But again, just a very big thanks for everyone for attending, and for all our contributors, panelists, and presenters. So I will draw the session to a close there. Oh, and if there's any questions remaining, we'll kind of capture those and answer them and send those around with the slide deck just to make sure that everyone's questions have been answered. But have a very good rest of your day or your evening, and hopefully see you at an event in the future. So, oh, yes, the one thing I did forget, how to register as a reviewer. Yes. Now, no, come on, here we go. This is why we're here. So there, obviously, in the sign up to the event, there was an option to express an interest. But if you go onto any of the OR Society journal homepages, if you go to the editorial board section or on the news and office section, or you go to the OR Society publications page, you'll find a link to click. There'll be a become a reviewer, and that will take you through to a form. You can fill in your details and indicate which journals you're interested in, your research interests, and we'll actually take your details, have a look at papers in process, and try and match you up with an associate editor, so a subject-based editor, and suggest them suggest you to them and hopefully link you up with a paper so you can begin your review journey. So I'm glad I didn't forget that. Thanks again, and see you soon.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.